When Jonah Lehrer started using his Kindle, he began to wonder if there was something about it that made him less likely to remember what he was reading on it. He wrote about it in his neuroscience blog for Wired, and then it was only a short while later that research was published that seems to support his intuition and challenges the traditional view that the easier a text is to read, the easier it is to remember the information. I spoke to him last night.
The history of typography is really the movement towards easier to read fonts, fonts that are clearer, fonts that make it easier to see the letters. We assume that anything which makes it easier to see the content, to process the content, is a good thing. And you see that especially in the classroom, where teachers assume that legibility makes it easier for kids to learn and remember the information they're trying to process. And that turns out to be exactly backwards. That disfluent fonts, fonts that people who know a lot about fonts kind of laugh off, fonts which are comically ugly, turn out to actually be the best for learning and memory.
And why should that be? Because it's what, irritating our brains slightly?
You know, there are a bunch of different speculations. One is that it's slightly irritating, and so we can't help but notice it. The one I'm most convinced by is the simple fact that we have to work a little bit harder, that when we see a font that's easy to read, something like Helvetica, we're able to process it in a very mindless way. But when we see an unfamiliar font, a font full of weird squiggles and curlicues, the visual cortex and the brain has to work a little bit harder, and that extra effort is a signal to the brain that maybe this is worth remembering.
Okay, now we have comprised just a little test on me, which is that I've been given a sheet which I've read over a couple of times, I should say with the kids hopping around in the background, and it was pieces of information in different fonts, and you're going to test me on it, aren't you?
I am. So tell me about the Anglo-Zulu War.
Oh my goodness. I tell you what, I can tell you that was in Arial font. Which is probably not the point of this.
Okay.
Maybe why I'm struggling with what... I can't.
How about Harold Shipman?
Harold Shipman killed himself in 2004.
Tell me about the 18th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution.
1920, Prohibition.
Yes, and that was in another ugly disfluent font, monotype Corsiva.
Right, and that really is a pretty sort of curly font.
Yeah, no, it's really ugly. It's designed to kind of imitate handwriting, although who has handwriting like that, I don't know.
So, Jonah, when that really simple test on me, it would suggest that there is something in it.
Yes, granted, it's this wasn't exactly the most rigorous empirical test, but I think we did get glimmers of the phenomenon, where you seem to have a slightly better memory for the uglier fonts.
As a result of this, should we, when we get an email in something or a document that we have to learn, should we convert it into a very difficult to read font?
Well, that'd be one interesting takeaway. I mean, I think at this point, given the fact that this is very initial evidence, I think it should simply make us question this long-standing assumption we have that clearer fonts are always better, that sometimes we may actually want to make our brain work a little bit harder, that when the parts of our brain devoted to reading have to exert that extra bit of effort, we may actually remember what we're reading even better. So it should just make us think more about graphic design. It should make us think more about the display of what we're reading, that the brain doesn't process all content equally, and that even seemingly insignificant shifts in how that content is displayed can have a big impact, can really and dramatically and significantly improve what exactly kids remember.
How interesting. Jonah Lehrer, thank you very much for that.